Okay, Bharti, can we start this? We can start?
Yeah, we can start.
Okay. Good morning to you all. I welcome to all participants to the webinar on international trade remedies to protect benefits with anti-dumping knowledge. And we have two wonderful speakers with us who are experts on anti-dumping. So probably they will explain to us, they will enlighten us with their expertise to know the very critical subject of trade remedies. Now I'll request our Vice Chairman, Hemant Minocha, to take the proceedings further. Over to Hemant Bhai.
Voice is too slow.
Benefits with anti-dumping knowledge. Can you hear me now?
Use little bit.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
I can hear
Can you hear me now?
properly.
Still voice is a little bit low.
Okay. Let me try again 1 second.
Okay.
So I maybe switch off my camera. I think it's taking too much bandwidth. Can you hear me now? Is it? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
Now it's better.
Okay. Sorry, I'll begin. Try again. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on international trade remedies titled Protect Your Benefits with Anti-Dumping Knowledge. Friends, as you are aware that trade remedies are trade policy tools that allow governments to take remedial action against imports which are causing or a domestic market. Such remedies lead into dumping duty or anti-dumping action, countervailing duty. So the WTO anti-dumping agreement allows countries to take action against countries exporting at dumped prices. Anti-dumping action is undertaken in response to an application from industry concerning injurious dumped imports and countervailing measures, subsidies, and WTO subsidies agreement. The subsidies agreement also regulates the action. The agreement regulates the actions countries and take to counter the trade effects of subsidies. Safeguard action is emergency action. Emergency safeguard action may be taken where a surge of imports causes or threatens to cause serious material injury to a domestic industry. In our long journey so far, Flex Council has over the years worked hand in hand with several plastics manufacturers, processors, and merchants across the country. Our aim is to collaborate closely with people and helping in identifying challenges and opportunities that form the foundation of our aim to strengthen the growth of our plastic industry. In the recent years, global economies are facing fiercer business competition, excess production, and other international challenges. A growing number of countries have been making use of anti-dumping measures in order to re-establish fair competition environments. Flex Council is keen on addressing these challenges. These challenges being faced by members on international trade remedial front. We urge all the participants to provide your valuable suggestions, your recommendations on these subjects, so that the council can represent to the respective government authorities, and we can help you get the remedial actions done. With this background, Flex Council is pleased to welcome all the participants And a special welcome to speakers of the day, Mr. M.S. Pothal and Mr. Ratish Puttu, to share special insights on today's important subject of international trade remedies. We also acknowledge the presence of COA members of council and office bearers of various associations and Chamber of Commerce taking out time joining us today. To hand the moderator the webinar. Sribaji, could you tell us more about the speakers, please? Could you introduce the speakers?
Sribaji is on mute.
Okay,
Say
maybe
mic
what
is
I
on
can
mute.
do it. Okay, so maybe I can introduce the first speaker. I'd like to introduce our first speaker.
Okay, all right. Okay.
It's he's an SCA LLB and from MS Pothal and Associates Chartered Accountant. Mr. MS Pothal is a first-class commerce graduate with distinction from Utkal University and a qualified chartered accountant. He holds a bachelor's degree in law as well. He is an expert on trade protection measures under WTO. Mr. Pothal has been instrumental in numerous anti-dumping investigations in India and abroad. He was third rank holder in the International Trade Laws (WTO) exam held by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in New Delhi in May 2008. Mr. Pothal specializes in anti-dumping, countervailing, and safeguard measures and has represented domestic producers, exporters, and importers in more than 300 cases of anti-dumping, anti-subsidy, and safeguard cases in India and abroad before competent authorities. So I would request the first speaker to make his speech, please.
Thank you, Mr. Minocha. And good morning to all of you. My name is MS Pothal. I am part of MS Pothal and Associates. I have with me my colleague, my partner Ratish Malattu, who is also an advocate and also working with us since last almost 15 years by now. At the outset, I would like to thank Plastic Export Promotion Council to give us this opportunity for this webinar. My special thanks to Mr. Das Mahapatra, Executive Director, Plastic Promotion Council, and Bharti Madam to organize this webinar. About my farm already Mr. Minocha has said about my farm. I'll directly come back to the topic. We'll start with a short presentation by my colleague Ratish. Thereafter, we'll have a question answer session if you have any questions regarding the topic or regarding some other matters regarding any of the things. Over to Mr. Ratish.
Mr. Pothal, I wanted to ask you, will you both be speaking together at the same time?
No. Mr. Ratish will be presenting the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
And after the PowerPoint presentation,
You are in mute, Mr. Pothal. Please unmute yourself. Mr. Pothal, please unmute yourself.
hello. My colleague Mr. Ratish will be presenting the PowerPoint presentation. In the question answer session, any questions regarding legal matters will be taken care by Ratish. Any questions regarding costing and other matters will be taken care by me.
So I can make a quick introduction of Mr. Ratish also.
Please.
To the participants. So Mr. Ratish Maluttu is an advocate on the roles of the Delhi Bar Council, who has got more than 10 years experience in the international trade-related disputes and practices alone. And Mr. Pothal's organization, that is MS Pothal and Associates, is also in the Government of India empanelment for the purpose of providing legal services, assistance to DOI related to trade remedy actions, which anti-dumping and safeguarding duty, safeguard duty by other member countries against product. So I'll do both of you to regale us with your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. Good morning. Namaste. Thank you very much for having us here today. I'll straight away get into the topics now because we are already 20 minutes ahead of our time. So I'll share a presentation. Just bear with me for a second. I hope everyone can view this presentation fairly now.
Yes, we can see that. Yep.
Yes, sir. So, sir, as the heading say, anti-dumping, safeguard, and countervailing duties laws, systems, and practices. Protect your benefits with the knowledge of trade remedial measures. Now, when we say, sir, benefits, I think this entire knowledge about the scheme can benefit you in three ways. That's the way I look at it. When I say three ways, if you are a producer and selling the product in India, and if you are facing competition from imported material, then you can benefit with the knowledge to stop that material, that unfair competition. So as a producer, you can benefit. Second, if you are an importer of this product, of some raw material, and the government is imposing anti-dumping, countervailing, or safeguard duties on that import, your raw material, then you should know how to defend that imposition. If you want to say, no, don't impose any anti-dumping duty on this product, then you should have the knowledge to whom to say no. That knowledge you should have. So that is the second part of it. And a third part is that if you are an exporter, you may be facing this kind of measures in the foreign countries also. So the scheme is the same. The concept, the legal framework, everything is the same for other countries also. But until and unless you have the knowledge what to do in case of an anti-dumping or subsidy or safeguard measures, you would not be able to represent yourself in a foreign country also. So that's going to be the third benefit. So as a producer, as an importer, as an exporter, you can benefit from the knowledge of this about the schemes. So we have put up a presentation here, which should help you to understand the basics of these schemes. Some of you may have the knowledge of these schemes. You might have faced these duties. You might have paid these duties. So you would have some knowledge about it. Someone may not be that aware of these schemes as it is. But then our presentation will be helpful for everyone if you have some knowledge, no knowledge. So we have made a basic kind of a presentation so that it should help everyone here, sir. Moving on to the objective, to provide an overview of trade remedial measures under WTO regime, such as anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, and safeguard duties. Also to brainstorm how the industries can benefit from the knowledge about these schemes. So I already touched upon that. How can you benefit from these schemes? So I will move to the next slide here. Trade protection measures under WTO regime. The first one is anti-dumping. Second one is countervailing duty. And the third one is safeguard duties. So the basic framework for all these duties are the WTO agreement, the GATT agreement, which we are talking about here. Now, what is the legal framework? When we say anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, safeguard duties, what are the origin of these duties? How can India impose these duties on our imports? Or how can foreign countries impose these duties on our exports? So this is all are coming from a larger bilateral world trade agreement. So when we talk about anti-dumping agreement, we are talking about Article 6 of the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade 1994. That is the main agreement that caused the creation of WTO itself. The Marrakech agreement at the end of the Uruguay round is what we are talking about, the GATT agreement here. Agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. That is the guiding light for all our subsidy agreements. Agreement on safeguards. So the safeguard mechanism in the world, including India, is governed by safeguard agreement. Similarly, it is for subsidies and anti-dumping also. Now coming to India, what India has done is that we have created our own local frameworks, legal frameworks to give effect to this agreement. So we can't initiate a case based on the anti-dumping agreement directly. So we developed our own rules and regulations and laws so that we imbibe the concept which is embedded there in the agreement, and we created our own rules and regulations, which has to be in conformity with the broader WTO agreement. That's the way we have drafted our rules and regulations. So when you talk about CVD, the countervailing duty, we use the jargons like CVD, ADD, SG to note these schemes. So Section 9A of Customs Tariff Act 1975 is the act which is the main legal section based on which the CVD is governed in India. Section 9A of Customs Tariff Act 1975 is the act which is also called as the Anti-Dumping Act, which is Section 9A of Customs Tariff Act. And Section 8B of Customs Tariff Act 1975 is the Safeguard Act actually. Apart from these acts, the acts provide for a governing rules also. Acts have the broader guidelines, but how to impose anti-dumping duties or how to conduct the investigation, who will conduct the investigation, all those practical provisions are included in the relevant rules here. So the main rule is collection of identification, assessment, and collection of anti-dumping duty on dumped articles and for determination of injury rules 1995. All these are amended from time to time. So when we are talking about these rules, we are talking about rules as it stand today. For countervailing duty also, customs tariff, identification, assessment, and collection of countervailing duty on subsidized articles and for determination of injury rules 1995. Customs tariff, identification, and assessment of safeguard duty rules 1997. This is the rules governing safeguard rules. A third one is here, Section 9A of Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992, Safeguard Measures, Quantitative Restrictions Rules 2012. And I'm only touching upon these regulations here because these are not part of the safeguard measures we talked about as part of the agreement. These are only quantitative restrictions rule. India has only done 1 or 2 cases initiated, not even given a finding in this regime. Have only initiated a couple of initiations so far. So by these measures, what India can do is that they can impose, restrict the volume of imports to a certain level. For example, they can say for X product during a particular year, India can only import 50,000 or 50,000 metric ton or 5,000 metric ton. So that kind of a quantitative restriction can be imposed. But this is altogether an emerging legal provision. We don't have any concluded investigation on this, on these schemes. Another sort of safeguard investigation which takes place is the safeguard investigation under specific bilateral trade agreements. For example, if India has a free trade agreement with Korea, Japan, or some countries, and if that free trade agreement imports by way of that free trade agreement is causing some injury to you, you can move a safeguard petition against that import also. But then it will be based on a provision given under that particular foreign trade free trade agreement itself. So these are two extraordinary kind of safeguard measures which is being done by India. We have a more number of bilateral trade safeguard measures under bilateral trade agreements, but not much in terms of quantitative restrictions. I'm only touching upon this point because just to tell you that apart from countervailing, safeguard, and WTO safeguard measures, these two more safeguard measures are in place if the industry wants to utilize it. Now coming to, sir, anti-dumping duties. Now, what is anti-dumping duties? What is the context in which these duties can be imposed? And this will be relevant if you're looking at it from a producer perspective. Of course, you would know about it from an importer or exporter perspective also. But as a producer, if you look at it, what is dumping? Essentially, dumping deals with the price behavior of an exporter. there is, when you might have heard about people talking about, oh, a lot of dumping taking place from China or from this country or that country. The general perception about dumping is that if something is getting imported at a very low price or at a throwaway price, the perception is that, or in the market parlance, people say, no, there's a lot of dumping taking place. That is only the market, what people perceive in the market parlance, but that is completely incorrect actually. Low price does not mean dumping. It can be undumped price also. So what is dumping? Essentially deals with the price behavior of an exporter. Dumping exists when a producer charging discriminatory prices in two markets. That is, higher prices in its domestic market and lower prices in other markets. So that's why it is called a price behavior. So a producer sitting in a country, he decides on two prices. So he would say, I will sell at a higher price in my domestic market. For say, I'll sell X product at 100 rupees in my market, but I will export that product to India at 80 rupees. That difference of 20 is what we call dumping margin. So the domestic market, you keep one price, and for export price, you keep Y price, a price lower than my domestic price. That's where dumping takes place. So this is how dumping is determined. What is countervailing duty or anti-subsidy duty? So this countervailing duty is also called as anti-subsidy duty because it deals with subsidies given to the exporter. Deals with the problem of subsidization of the goods by the governments including private, public bodies, etc. There are two sort of subsidies here. One is prohibited subsidies and actionable subsidies. When we say prohibited subsidies, the WTO agreement itself has identified two sorts of subsidies here. One is prohibited subsidies. There is no question of the governments does not have to do anything much to prove up existence of a prohibited subsidy. If a government is giving a subsidy on exports per se, so for example, if the government say, oh, you export this product and take 10% from us, you will get a benefit of 10%, 5% on your export. This is a prohibited subsidy. You can't directly give any benefit for exports, which is prohibited under the WTO regime. Another one is actionable subsidies. Actionable subsidies, it can be a subsidy on domestic sourcing also, but it'll have to be proof that this subsidy has the quality of a prohibited subsidy. Then only it will be actionable. There are certain conditions which has to be fulfilled by the claimant there. If they can't fulfill those conditions, the other government can always countervail these benefits given to a exporter in its country. Subsidy can be defined as a conferment of financial benefit to the industry. There has to be a benefit conferred to the exporter or a party to say it is a subsidy. It can be either a cash transfer, a cash direct transfer, or it can be a benefit which is foregone by not collecting a tax or a cost by the government. It can happen in both ways. Either you give a benefits in terms of financial benefits, say you will get 5%, 10% on purchase of material or whatever. But otherwise, government can say, no, if you export or you take the material from us free of cost. Normally, if you go for that material, the tax would be 10%. Government would say, no, you can use it, but we will not impose any tax on you. So that tax, 10% tax foregone by the government will be considered as subsidy there. So it is either a benefit given to you or a benefit foregone by the government. So all these will be counted as subsidies. Safeguard measures deals with the problem of sudden increase in imports in relatively short period. Can be in the form of duty, quantitative restrictions, should be sparingly used. Safeguard is one measure which can be put in place by countries so quickly against all countries. Basically, when it comes to safeguard measures, these are country-specific investigations. In anti-dumping or countervailing duty investigations, it is always against the exporters. The difference is that in safeguard, no exporter can claim any particular margin for him. It will, whatever is determined will be applicable. Country-wide rates are applied. But in case of anti-dumping or subsidy cases, individual margins also will be given. So, for example, anti-dumping duty of 50% could be imported on a party from, across country, but some Chinese exporters can get zero anti-dumping duty also. But when it comes to safeguard measures, if the government imposes a duty of 10%, it will be applicable on all exporters from China. Nobody, be it any country, China, US, Europe, whichever country is that, the duty will be similar for everyone. There would not be any individual margin determination for safeguard. And the requirements also is relatively low. When it comes to subsidy or anti-dumping investigation, the investigation process itself, the requirement itself is so vast. But then relatively in safeguard measures, what you have to show is that a surge in import you have to show, and that has to be sudden. If it is a normal increase, the case will not fit the requirement. It has to be a sudden spike in import. So basically, it is to address an exigency kind of a situation. For some reason, if a country start exporting huge volumes to another country, this measures can be called upon. India has used these measures also, relatively very low in number if you compare with dumping or subsidy investigations. Very, very few cases, I would say, in terms of safeguard measures. Affected countries must be granted equivalent concessions in other areas. So if you are imposing duty on this product, they need to be granted some concessions on the import of some other products also. Now, having said, sir, these three measures: anti-dumping, subsidy, and safeguard. Now, who are the competent authority in India? If you want to say we want anti-dumping duty, or if you want to say no, we don't want anti-dumping duty, you should know which is the competent authority to go and say these things. There's no point in writing letters to the ministers or MPs or MLAs to defend to get anti-dumping duties or defend a case of anti-dumping, because it's a quasi-judicial investigation process. These are not policy matter of the government. These are legislations of the parliament as part of a bilateral agreement. So whatever objections or concerns you have, whether to impose the duty or to get rid of the duty, you have to go through the competent authorities who's handling these matters. So competent authority in India, which is the authority which is giving recommendations of duties in India in ADD and CVD investigations, that is anti-dumping and countervailing duties, is the designated authority and under the Directorate General of Trade Remedies. They are located at Jivantara Building, 4th floor, 5 Parliament Street, New Delhi. Now, till prior to 2018-19, anti-dumping and countervailing investigations were handled by the same authority, but safeguard investigations were completely with another department under Ministry of Finance. Post 18-19, the government has merged these departments into one directorate. So it is now called Directorate General of Trade Remedies. But it is the same person who is handling all three profiles. But when he sits for determining on dumping and subsidy investigations, he'll be called designated authority. But he has to administer a safeguard matter. He will be called Director General Safeguards. But the other system, the infrastructure for all these three investigations are the same. Same directorate is in conducting the investigation. Same people are taking care of these investigations. As I said, the work of this directorate is only recommendatory in nature. They give recommendations to the Ministry of Finance whether or not to impose a duty. So imposition is always done by Ministry of Finance. Their tax research unit is the department taking care of it. Once a recommendation for duty goes to the Ministry of Finance, it is absolutely under their discretion. They don't have to conduct any further investigation, etc. Through their internal mechanism, they can decide to impose. If they decide, they will notify the duty. They will impose. They will notify it in the Gazette. Otherwise, the case will be simply closed. Now, coming to who can file an anti-dumping petition. So when you have to, when you face a challenge in terms of unfair competition from imports, and if you see, no, these imports must be stopped, and these imports are not coming at fair price, and because of these imports, I'm not able to sell my product in the country. I'm not able to gain a fair price for my product. That is the situation where you decide, you can think of filing an anti-dumping petition. Now, when you have a problem, you need to identify whether this is happening due to dumping, or is it because the exporters are getting some sort of subsidies, that's why they are exporting at this price to me. That you have to identify. You'll have to identify also whether it is there is no pattern of import, but then this import started to coming at a very short duration of time. So all of a sudden you are seeing some import. So then you can think of a safeguard application. So basically, you'll have to evaluate the pattern of import. So what is the nature of import? Why is it coming so? In most of the cases, it is a phenomenon called dumping investigations. And if it is dumping, and if you decide to move a petition, then these basic things will have to be fulfilled there. Broadly, the requirements are same for anti-dumping, safeguard, and subsidy. So when I tell you the requirements for anti-dumping, it will fulfill the requirements for other investigations also. So I don't have to. I'm not taking you through the different requirements for all three. These are the broader requirements, even if it is dumping, safeguard, or countervailing duty. So here, as anti-dumping is the largely used scheme, I'm telling you, I'm doing these discussions based on anti-dumping requirements. Who can file an anti-dumping petition? Domestic producers on behalf of domestic industry. And petition is different from domestic industry. Now, what is the requirement here? You need to identify what you are producing and who all are the other producers in the country. Take a total count of this production and understand what is your share in that. If you're not even the largest producer, you will have to see who is the largest producer. How can I reach to that threshold? And what is the threshold? As a petitioner, you should meet at least 25% of the total Indian production. So if total Indian production is 100, the petitioner, it can be 1 company, 2 companies, 3 companies, 4 companies. Whoever is coming for, planning that petition should meet 25% of that requirement first. Thereafter, it should be supported by not less than 50%. So 25% of the producers, they should give the information, meet this first threshold, and the rest of the producers can give us support to you. So they can say, we support this petition, even though we are not participating as a petitioner, we are supporting this petition, and put together, the number should meet the 50% threshold. So if you are a petitioner, if you are planning to file a petition, you will have to fulfill this 25% threshold first. Until and unless that 25% is met with other producers or individually, you can't file a petition. It will be rejected. That is the first requirement there. Domestic, here we have the definition of domestic industry here. Domestic producers as a whole of the like products, or those who have collective output constitute a major proportion. So what the requirement under the rule is that the petitioner should constitute a major proportion in the total Indian production. But when we say major proportion, it is not that the petitioner should have more than 50%. The definition is further interpreted in such a way that the petitioner individually should have 25% and collectively should constitute 50%. Domestic producers as a whole of the domestic light product. Now that's why I said you need to identify the product. Product X is getting imported from India. And when you have to move a petition for imposition of anti-dumping duty on that product X, you need to identify who is producing product X in India. It is not that it has to be product X. It could be product X plus or minus, but it should be a directly competing product. If your if you have to say that, oh, what we are producing is nothing but the product X only, if it is a direct material article, I mean, by definition, by nature, if everything is same, then you can directly say, no, we are producing that product only. But in case if there is a difference, a product is getting imported, but you're not manufacturing exactly the same product, it doesn't mean that you don't qualify. There is a provision under the rule to determine the likeness of this product. So it has to be a like article. It is not that it has to be the exact article. It has to be a like article. So it's a huge concept there. What is like article? Like article is determined in every investigation. This is one contentious issue in every anti-dumping investigation. So people would always say, no, my product is different from what is imported, or the exporter would come and say, no, what I'm exporting to India is not being manufactured in India. My product is this quality or this make, but the Indian company is manufacturing using a different technology, different raw materials. So you can't say these are like articles. So this is a larger issue itself in the conduct of this investigation. So, but for the basic understanding, it has to be a like article to what is getting imported into India. If you are saying there is no likeness between what you are manufacturing and what is getting imported to India, there is no case there. Domestic industry exceptions. Now, when you have to file a petition, as I said, the first condition is that you need to meet certain threshold. You have to fulfill the major proportion requirements under Rule 2B. There are certain exceptions. If you fall under any of these categories, there will be an exception. You will be excluded by law. In fact, this exception is also a matter of discretion of the authority. I mean, they can evaluate and see what is the degree of these points given here, and they can decide on it. But prima facie, you will be excluded from applying for a petition if you fall in any of these categories. Related companies, exporters, importers, itself importer. So if a Indian company is related to a exporter who is dumping the material in India, you don't qualify as a petitioner. So your relation with the exporter can disqualify you as a petitioner. If you are related to an importer of the product, and if the relation falls within the definition given in the rules, then also you are excluded. And third category is you yourself is an importer. You also import the product. You are a domestic manufacturer, but you also import the product. In that case, also you are excluded from filing a petition. But this is also a well-settled issue in India. It is not that at the threshold you will not be excluded. What is the quantity you importer? Have you become a importer by importing this material, or do you have the behavior? Do you have the qualities of a producer? Is what the authority will examine there. And if they find these imports are not material, not so significant that you can still be called as an Indian producer, your petition will be examined. So these are all basically matters of examination after filing the petition. But you should have the basic knowledge there. Yeah, import or relation to importer or exporter can lead to rejection of your petition. Like article, as I said, what is like article? This is a term embedded in the Act and rule itself. Identical article, similar product, what characteristics are relevant? These points we will see in our next slides. Like article examination. Now, when you say my product is a like article to the product under consideration or the product getting imported to India, you have to say my product is like article to the imported product in a technical language. It is not that you can simply go and say, oh no, what I am producing is like article to what is getting imported to India. That statement itself is not sufficient. It will be examined through the prism of these technical characteristics. What are relevant there? Physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, manufacturing process and technology, functions and uses, product specifications, pricing, distribution and marketing, tariff classification of the goods. So these are the standard principles which is considered by the authorities across the world while determining a case of anti-dumping or anti-dumping safeguard or subsidy matters. Even if you go to a foreign authority, for example, US or European Union, even if they have to examine the likeness of the product imported, they go through these principles. So you'll have to say, my product is like article based on these principles. Manufacturing process and technology. Now, every parameter of these tests are contested in different cases differently. For example, manufacturing process and technology. Now, if you are talking about two technologies, for example, we have cars using diesel and petrol. Now, these are two different technologies. So cars of petrol and diesel, can they be clubbed in one investigation? So questions of this kind will come there. So whether a technology render a product different will also be examined. So for example, a time may come, what is getting imported into India, cars using petrol as a technology, but India have no manufacturing of petrol, but we only manufacture diesel. So can diesel manufacturers say the imported cars are impacting our product? So then it will be subjected to a further examination. Can we call these two technologies basically manufacture car only? So we can impose duty on import of petrol cars based on injury cost to diesel car manufacturers. So that kind of examination, that will be part of the facts of every investigation. We can't simply say, no, this product is not like article, or this product is not, is like article. It will be a subject matter of investigation in our investigation. So when we are talking about some 400, 500 investigations in India, put together all these schemes, I think more than 50% of these investigations had like article as an issue. So we often say, no, this product, what is imported, manufactured in India is different from what is exported from these countries. So these issues always come here. So we need to understand what we are manufacturing and what is getting imported to India while we file the petition. So the product has to be defined and understood. The injury needs to be collated, etc. And with a clear understanding of what we manufacture, what is our product, and what is getting imported to India. Otherwise, a petition may even get rejected. Initiation of investigation. So, so when you file the petition after fulfilling all these requirements, we have prescribed pro forma for all filing a petition. The department itself has put in place pro formas. So when you are filing a petition for imposition of duty, you need to file the application in the prescribed pro forma only. It will have write-up parts. You need to fulfill the legal requirements there. You'll have to give numbers on what kind of injury you suffered. So once you give that kind of a petition, it will be evaluated by them. And after that, they make a prima facie case to begin the investigation. That process is called initiation of investigation. Initiation of investigation means the authority is prima facie satisfied with your case, and they will call for further investigation. They will ask exporters, importers, etc. to participate. So that is the stage we call initiation of an investigation. So initiation is done to determine existence, degree, and effect of alleged dumping, injury caused by that dumping, and a causal relationship between the two. Now, what is being addressed in all these investigations is that you need to, the injury caused by this dumping and subsidy or surge in import alone is addressable through these investigations. So if you suffer injury for some other reasons, it cannot be addressed through dumping or subsidy duties. So they have to determine whether there is dumping, whether there is injury, and if dumping is there, injury is there, if there is no causal relation between the two, then it is not actionable. There is positive dumping, but no injury, it is not actionable. Dumping has to be there. If there is injury, but there is no dumping, there cannot be any duty. So all these three has to be positive and has to go in tandem. So dumping caused by injury is what actionable under anti-dumping. Injury caused by subsidy is what actionable under countervailing scheme. And injury what caused by surge in import is actionable under safeguard. But as we mentioned earlier, it is not just injury that we will discuss in in the following slides here. It can be a material retardation. It can be a threat of injury also. So depending on the case, you need to look at it. If you are saying that you are not able to establish the industry itself because of this import, you can file. In that case, if you haven't established yourself, there cannot be any injury. But if you see, currently I'm doing okay, but then in the near future I may suffer because of dumping or subsidy. There also you can move a petition. So that is called a situation of threat of injury. So in all these cases, initiation is what takes place. Just bear with me for a second. I think a slide is stuck here.
We can see now.
Yeah. So evidence. Once the initiation is done, you need to provide the evidences. From the petitioner side, the evidence has to be part of initiation, part of the petition. So evidence of dumping or subsidy will be part of the petition. Once the initiation is done, the other parties will get the opportunity. Until and unless a formal initiation is done by the authority, other parties, the importer, exporter, etc., they cannot participate. So initiation will be the stage. After initiation, the authority will start collecting all the relevant information from all the stakeholders. Full opportunity to all parties to defend their interests. Notice of initiation to all interested parties. 40 days time to reply. Due consideration to request for extension. Provision for submission of information on confidential basis. Exchange of non-confidential evidence. Opportunity for oral submissions. Now, these are the major steps that take place upon initiation. When the case is initiated, everyone gets 40 days time to respond to that initiation. That is so across the world. So even if if US has to initiate a case against India, there also you will get this time, 40 days time, 35 days to 40 days time. Europe also would give you this time. So this is the time during which you need to respond to the authority. If you fail to file your responses within this time, your response will not be considered. It can be rejected. Now, as importers, as producers, as exporters, you should always be aware that you need to file timely responses in case of an initiation. If you file a response after the timelines, the authorities are not bound to accept your responses. Even though the initial investigation is spread over 1 or 1.5 years, it can be extended up to 1.5 years. The 40 days time given to you is sacrosanct. After that, acceptance of that response is our discretion of the authority. No court of law also can enforce. Ask the DA, no, even if they haven't filed the response on time, you should take it now. No force can say that. 40 days is the time given under the rule, but it can be extended. Normally 1 week, 15 days, 20 days, depending on the scenario in a particular case. Extensions are given on request, not otherwise. If you make a specific request, if you cite a specific difficulty there to say that no, I'll not be able to file this response in 40 days time, you can ask for an extension to the competent authority. So for that also, you should know which is the competent authority to seek extension. When you rightly make the request for extension, you will always get the extension there. Provision for submission information on confidential basis and exchange of non-confidential evidence. This is very peculiar to this anti-dumping, anti-subsidy and safeguard investigations. Even if you go to a court of law and file a writ petition, there is no provision of confidentiality there. You'll have to share all your information. But when it comes to anti-dumping, subsidy, all these schemes, you can protect your data. You don't have, you have to give the information only to the designated authority or the Directorate General of Safeguards. There you can't claim an information confidential, but you're not bound to share the confidential information with the other information. If you see a particular information as confidential to you, you can keep it confidential. A lot of parties do not participate in many investigations saying that, no, we'll have to share the data. We are not ready to share the information. It can get leaked. We will suffer. So when it comes to these three investigations, be assured that your data will not get shared with anyone until and unless some people use some, improper channels to, rob the data. We can't help it actually. But then, as per the rule is concerned, as far as the act is concerned, your data is always protected. What needs to be given to the other parties is that you should allow the party to understand what is your case all about. You can't hide entire thing from the other parties. But when it comes to the information which is not published by you, for example, if you are a listed company and your annual reports are available on your website or elsewhere, you can't claim that as confidential. Otherwise, you can claim those information as confidential. So you'll have to identify what information which you want to keep confidential, and you need to give a reasoning for these reasons. I want to keep my confidential information away from other parties. So don't worry about this issue that participation in these investigations means sharing my data with others. It is not required. So until and unless you know this process, you'll not be able to take care of it. Opportunity for oral submission. So if you are an importer or a petitioner, whoever is that, if you are an interested party, you will get two kinds of opportunities. One is that you can give written submission. You can give all documentary evidences to say impose duty or to say no, don't impose duty. So you can say that through written communication, and also you will get an opportunity to say these things orally. So a hearing is granted without fail in every investigation. In case if there is a change in the authority, then you will get another opportunity of hearing. So without hearing, no findings are, no recommendations are made by the authority. So you can always go in person or through your legal representative. You can represent your views before the authority. This is a continuation of what we have seen there as evidence: maintenance of public file, examination of accuracy of information supplied, verification of the information, rule of best available information, rules of confidentiality. Now, when you give the information to the authority, the non-confidential information is maintained for the consumption of every party, so everyone can access the submission made by the other party. Verification of the information and rules of best available information. Now, these are two important concepts when you talk about the practices involved in the investigation. Verification of the information means when you give some data to the authority as a petitioner, as an exporter, as an importer, that information is subject to a physical verification by the designated authority. They can come to your premise and verify it. I mean, these days, due to this COVID pandemic situation, that on-site verification is not taking place, but that is only an exception. But otherwise, be it a foreign exporter, importer, or domestic industry, the authority, their persons will come to your premises and it will be checked based on your actual records. They can access your systems, then data where you maintain this data. They can come and see your factory. So these are all part of the verification. So it's a full-fledged investigation. You can't deny access them to your premises to say no, you will not conduct verification. So it will the entire information will be taken into consideration with due verification only, and that is the only way they can satisfy themselves what you have claimed is correct. So verification is a feature of this investigation across the world. Rules of best available information. Now, why you need to participate in investigation is what is relevant in the context of rule of best available information. As a petitioner, you would be giving information to them to seek the anti-dumping or subsidy duties. But as an importer or as an exporter, when you don't participate, how will the designated authority reach to certain conclusions? they will use the best available information. So if you go and give your data, the authority will use your data to reach to certain conclusions. But otherwise, an adverse fact always be used against you. So when a petitioner filing a petition can make any claim of dumping, they can say 100% dumping margin based on the data. But until and unless the exporter participates and say, no, this is not correct, what the petitioner has claimed is all incorrect, and the correct information is not provided, the designated authority will be constrained to reach to a conclusion based on the data which says the dumping margin is 100%. So as a result, what we see in many investigations where there is no participation of the exporter or importer, you would see very high quantum of anti-dumping duties or subsidy duties or safeguard duties. But in highly contested cases, you would see relatively very lower margin or no duty also. So that's why participation from exporter, importer, user, etc. is very relevant, because this is a data information-driven investigation. This is not that a few people sitting in the department takes a policy-level decision to impose or not impose duty, like in the case of determination of basic customs duty. The government can take the decision without doing a lot of data churning. They can decide it upfront. But in terms of these, in the ambit of these investigations, the duty is always the outcome of a lot of data crunching, information verification. So you need to give information to get duty and also to avoid duties. So information needs to be shared. Another important aspect when it comes to investigations, interested parties. Exporter or foreign producers, importers, trade or business association, government of the exporting country, producers of like product in the country, trade or business association, any other party. Now, this is very important. If there is a anti-dumping investigation taking place, who can participate in that? So exporter of foreign producers, the concerned exporter of that product is treated as an interested party, and he can participate in that investigation. If a foreign party, he has no way related the product, he cannot participate in the investigation and say impose duty or not impose duty. So your interest has to be shown as per the rules here. An importer is an interested party. Trade or business association, for example, the export promotion, the council which we are on here today. You are also an interested party if a product where you are concerned is getting imported to India. Trade or business association, government of the exporting country, producers of like product in the country. So normally that might be the producer, or if there is a producer who is not participating and he wants to support or oppose the petition, he also will be treated as a producer there. Any other party. Now, the definition of interested party under the WTO agreement is a very inclusive definition, I would say. What you need to do is that if you want to participate in an investigation, you need to show a reason why you want to participate. Now, if you can satisfy, and if you don't fall in any of these categories, still your views will be heard by the designated authority. Provisional measures. So once the initiation is initiated, after the petition, 40 days time as extended is over, the designated authority can move on to impose, recommend provisional measures. We call it interim duties also. Interim duties is on, as the name says, it's only a provisional duty for maximum for 6 months time. That is same, the provisions are same for anti-dumping or safeguard or countervailing also. So after a preliminary inquiry, in case it is required, a provisional duty is recommended. Time frame for interim is 6 to 8 months from the initiation. It can happen anytime after 2 months, 2 months time if the other processes are completed there. So the perception is that interim duties are recommended at the earliest to give sort of immediate relief to the petitioner. That is the concept behind provisional measures. The authority can reject a lot of information of the exporter, importer, etc. to while recommending these duties. and it is very difficult to challenge provisional measures in normal course. Interim normally based on provisional estimates. So the provisional finding and final finding can be, there can be a lot of difference in both these determinations. So they have to take a prima facie view at the time of provisional measures and impose certain duties there. Duration and review of anti-dumping duties and price undertakings. Now, once the duties imposed, once the definitive anti-dumping duties are imposed at the end of a full-fledged investigation, which is normally concluded within 1 year, which can be extended up to 1.5 years, duties are normally imposed for 5 years. There are exceptions. Duties were imposed for 1.5 years also, 2 years also, but that I said is only an exemption. So certain authority, they would want to try something different, so they would say no. This case, in the facts of this case, we find it fit to only recommend duties for 1.5 years. But as I said, out of this 500 investigations, barely 2 or 3 investigations would have duties recommended other than for 5 years. But it is normal, the thumb rule is 5 years there. Duty enforced as long as necessary. Now, this is very peculiar about anti-dumping and subsidy duties. Once the duty is imposed, it can be extended after 5 year and 5 year and 5 year, and the upper limit is not fixed in the rule. It can be, the duty can be there for 50 years also. The duty can be there for 30 years also. So once you get a protection of anti-dumping duty on your product, or once a duty is imposed, and at the end of the 5 year, a review can take place anytime after the imposition after 1 year. So once the duty is imposed, and if you complete 1 year from the date of initiation, it can be subject matter of a review. The review can be to revoke the duty or to extend the quantum of duty. So as a petitioner, when you file a petition and you get duties imposed, after 1 year, you realize that no, the quantum is not giving me enough protection. You can again go to the authority and say, no, the duty is not sufficient. I'm still suffering injury, raise the quantum. So you can file a review petition there. After 1 year, if an importer feels or an exporter feels that no, the purpose of duty is over, there is a huge change in the circumstances which led to the imposition of duty, you can go to the same authority and say, no, you conduct a review now and revoke the duty. So if the duty is revoked, it will go for 5 years. At the end of the 5 year, a review has to happen. Either the DA can suo moto conduct an initiation, which is rarely done, or I would say not done. It is done with the petition from a domestic industry. In one of the investigations they have done recently, but that is again not a practice, not a general practice. So always the petitioner files a well-documented petition asking for extension of duty, and that's where they initiate a expiry review, what we call a sunset review. And on that review, they can decide whether to continue or to revoke the duty. And if they say the injury is likely to happen because of this dumping, if the duties are allowed to expire, they can extend the duty for another 5 years. Thereafter, again, if they feel there is a need for continuation, it can be extended for another 15th year. There are duties which is in force for the past 20 years, actually. So duties can be extended. Periodical review on initiative or upon request by interested party. I already touched upon that. Price undertaking. Now, this is an alternative measure here, because when you initiate an investigation, and if the larger number of exporters come and say, no, we don't impose any anti-dumping duty, we are ready to fall in line and we are ready to export at a fair price to India. In that case, the authority can accept the price undertaking. So if a exporter say, no, I'll henceforth I will import this product at only at this price, and the Indian petitioner and the authority feels that that price is good to us, it is not going to impact us, then they can accept this undertaking. And once the undertaking is accepted, no imposition of duty would be there. So irrespective of imposition, the undertaking will be accepted, and the price given as undertaking will be the benchmark price in that case of exports. Normally discouraged by the authorities. So basically, in India also, we haven't done undertakings in more than 3 or 4 investigations, because there are a lot of procedural issues, and monitoring this undertaking is very difficult. Once an exporter offer you a particular price, and monitoring whether the exporter is exporting at that price only, or whether he has changed the prices, it's a Herculean task actually. So authority generally don't accept price undertaking. It has done in some cases, 1 or 2 or 3 cases so far, but was not a very successful mechanism in India and not followed by India. Now, what happens once the duty is recommended by the designated authority and the same is accepted by the Ministry of Finance? A judicial review, there are multiple levels of judicial review here. Why I included this slide here is that what happens once the duty is imposed? What are the remedies available to you? Once the recommendation is made by the DGTR, the designated authority, and Ministry of Finance takes a call to impose the duty, is that the end of the story, or do you have any further remedies to still challenge this levy, or to if the government decide not to impose any duty? So do you, as a petitioner, do you have any remedy available there? So an appeal provision is given there under the rule itself. So after the Ministry of Finance notifies the duties, you can file an appeal before Customs Excise Service Tax Appellate Tribunal, what we call in short CESTAT, New Delhi. The appeal can only be filed before the CSTAT bench in New Delhi. You can't file any appeal, anti-dumping appeals before any other benches. You'll have to come to Delhi and file it here only. It is filed based on a nominal fee of 15,000 rupees per appeal is charged when you file an appeal. So appeal provision is the most effective appeal provision, and you always have the option of approaching the high courts also in writ jurisdiction. The writ route you can take even after an initiation also, but the maintainability of the writ will be an issue. You'll have to show a legal reason, a legal issue there to when you approach any of the high courts with a writ petition. You can go to Delhi High Court because the designated authority is based in Delhi. Otherwise, based on your jurisdiction, if you are a party based in Bombay, you can go to Bombay High Court also. If you are a party based in Chennai, you can go to Chennai High Court also. That route you can take at any point in time of the investigation, but you'll have to show a cause before the high courts to say that they should interfere through a writ petition. Otherwise, you will be directed to go to the CSTAT. Appeal against negative decisions. Now, this is something. This is a new development actually. Till 2018, if the designated authority decides not to impose any anti-dumping duty, as a petitioner, you were constrained only to approach the high courts in writ petition. But the high court in a recent matter decided that the CSTAT can hear appeal in case of a negative finding by the designated authority also. So if you are a petitioner and if you haven't got any duty from the designated authority, you also can approach the CSTAT. Now, the decisions of the CSTAT can further be challenged in SLP before the Supreme Court. The decisions of High Court can be again challenged before the Supreme Court. So, a decision of the designated authority will not get a finality until and unless a Supreme Court decision has emerged on it. So, if you are a party and if you are aggrieved by the decision of the designated authority in either way, you can go up to the Supreme Court of India to seek a relief. So, there is a huge mechanism given under the rule itself. So, these duties, this form of duties can be effectively used. There are multiple, platforms available you to challenge the decision, the imposition or non-imposition. So it's a wide mechanism altogether. And if you're not happy with the Indian decisions, a foreign country can also go to the WTO. Now, going to WTO settlement can only be done by a particular country. So if Chinese exporters are not happy with the dumping, duty decisions of India, China or US or EU or India for that matter, if India is not happy with imposition of duty by US or Europe, India can go to the WTO ultimately and say should re-examine this imposition. So there's this huge provision given available to challenge this decision at various stages. Public notices. There will be gazette notifications concerning this investigation. At least 4 notifications would be there. One is minimum, we are talking about minimum 3 notices because one is initiation that has to be gazette notified. In case of preliminary finding, that also has to be gazette notified. Then in case of final findings, that also has to be gazette notified. A 4th one would be there, that will be the Ministry of Finance notification. So if the Ministry of Finance decide to impose any duty, a gazette notification will be there on the ultimate duty also. Otherwise, if the government chose not to impose any duty, there will not be any gazette notification. It will just end there. Now, what is injury? As I said, there can be a different form of injury. It is not seen through prism of just one parameter. It can be material injury, wherein you already suffered injury. It is measured through various parameters. For example, your capacity utilization has gone down, your production gone down, your sales gone down, your selling price reduced, your profitability came down, your return on capital employed declined. So these are all parameters showing your injury. It will depend on facts of each and every case. Then you have a case of threat of material injury. Threat of material injury means it also will have to be measured through certain parameters, that you are seeing some injury in the future. In the immediate future, there is a case for you to believe that you will soon suffer injury. That is a case of threat of material injury. Material retardation to establishment of an industry. So this is a even peculiar situation. As a producer, you started you put up a plant, but you're not able to produce the goods because the presence of dumped material is so high that you're not able to penetrate into the market. You made efforts to get into the market, but the imports are really prohibiting you to sell sell the product in the market. So that is a situation of material retardation. You are retarded. That also can be an issue addressed under the injury category under the anti-dumping rules. So if you're a producer and don't think that until and unless you show some material injury in terms of these parameters, don't think that then only you can come before the authority. If you're facing challenges to establishment of an industry, then also you can approach the authority. Material deterioration in performance, volume effect, and price effect. So ultimately, the material deterioration in performance is measured through the effect on your volume and price parameters. As I said, volume effect would be measured in terms of your market share, production volumes, capacity expansions, and price effect would be judged on the basis of price parameters. So what is the kind of price undercutting the import prices are doing? So if the price of dumped imports or subsidized imports are undercutting your prices, or if they are coming at a very lower price than yours, it means that prices are undercutting your price. And what is the effect of that kind of undercutting on your performance? Whether it is suppressing your price decisions, whether you are facing, as a result of that price undercutting and suppression, whether you are making cash losses or your profitability is coming down, whether you are achieving positive return on capital employed, or the situation is that your return on capital employed also deteriorated. So it can be a negative situation. It doesn't mean that injury means you're making losses. It can be a situation that your profitability has come down. It has declined. It is still in positive area, but it has come down, if you compare it with previous 3 years or 4 years. So you are doing good 4 years back, but now you have come to a lower level. So that is also a situation of injury here. 2 forms of injury: volume effect, increase in imports in absolute terms in relation to production. These are all the parameters which is inbuilt there in the rule itself. So this is the way it is technically measured. Volume effect increase in import in absolute terms in relation to production and consumption, price effect, significant price difference between imported product and domestic product, import resulting in price reductions, import preventing price increases. So these are all technical jargons. The examination at the end of the authority will be made in these languages. Volume effect, deterioration in terms of production, sales volume, market share, price effect, deterioration in terms of profits, cash flow, return on investment. Two types of deterioration. It can be actual on historical databases. It can be potential also. Time period of injury. So normally the data, the examination is done considering 4 years data. So you will get good time to evaluate the data. So at least 4 years data is considered there. Injury to the domestic industry, threat of material injury. What is threat? What parameters show threat? Rate of increase, as I said, threat has to be measured in a reasonable manner. Simply saying that there is threat, it is not sufficient. The authority will measure the threat through some parameters, and you have to show a real threat there. Rate of increase in import, what parameters show threat? So rate of increase in imports, significant price difference between domestic and imported product, significant unutilized capacities with foreign producers. So these are all parameters which will be relevant to measure the threat perspective there. So if there is a huge rate in import in a short span of time, you can always say, no, this trend of import is going to last there. Significant price difference between domestic and imported products. So in a situation where you see very huge difference between imported and your product, then you can say the trend is going to remain there for another some time. So that also can be a reasonable situation to say there is I face huge threat from these imports. Significant unutilized capacities with foreign producers. Now this is also considered as a very important parameter to measure the threat perspective. So if you can show that for a particular product, an exporting country has huge capacity, unutilized capacities, they have no domestic market. So the possibility in that kind of a situation is that they will be exporting more to India or to, for that matter, any country. So they'll be dependent on export. So if you can show these parameters, you'll be having a very successful case on threat actually. Imminent threat versus conjecture or remote possibility. So what the authority would want a party to show before that is an imminent threat and not mere conjecture or remote possibility. So we can't simply say, there is a possibility, will not accept it. So you have to show a threat there. Dumping and injury margin. This slide have, it's very technical in nature. We'll try, I will try to tell you what are the determining, factors involved in this anti-dumping duties and dumping margin, etc. So these are all technical concepts. I'll take you one by one there. Dumping margin, as I said, it is a difference between normal value and export price. Normal value is perceived as normal value is the price which is prevailing in the domestic market of an exporting country. There are mechanisms to determine what is normal value that is provided in an annexure in the rule itself. So there is a huge mechanism to decide normal value. It is not a simpliciter concept. It can be the domestic selling price, or if that is not reliable, it can be cost of production plus a profitability on that. So when we say simply normal value, you need to understand it has a huge concept behind it. And in case of countries like China, when we say they are operating under no market economy, so there is a whole different mechanism to determine their normal value. In case of a no market economy, be it China or some other country, their normal value is not taken into consideration because we say their prices are distorted because of government involvement. So in that case, an alternative basis is used to determine the normal value. That is what done in cases of China, etc. Export price, net export price is what considered here at what price they have exported to India. So once you decide these two figures, and once you work out the difference between the two, that is going to be your dumping. Injury margin. Now, what is injury margin here? India, when you talk about WTO agreement, the WTO agreement said you can impose anti-dumping duties to the level of dumping margin, but preferably to the level to remove the injury to the domestic industry. Dumping margin, up to dumping margin is what you can do, but if you can work out a mechanism which puts a lower margin, a lower quantum of duty, which you feel would be sufficient to remove injury to you, is a concept which India accepted. Like India or Europe, countries like India and Europe accepted a lower margin rule there. But country like China, USA imposes duty to the level of dumping. So when India adopted a lower margin in principle, they put in a system to determine a margin called injury margin. So what is injury margin? Injury margin is the difference between non-injurious price and landed price. So they would decide a non-injurious price for the Indian producer, and they would compare that with the landed price of imports. The difference between the two will be called injury margin. And if the injury margin is lower than the dumping margin, injury margin would be converted as the anti-dumping duty. So if you take out Indian cases, in most of the cases, India have imposed duty on injury margin basis. In most of the cases, the dumping margin, for example, would be in the range of 50 to 60%. And in the same case, the injury margin would be, the dumping margin would be in the case of, for example, 50 to 60%. The injury margin would be in the range of 20 to 30% in that case, or say, 5 to 10%. So what India would impose as anti-dumping duty would be the 5 to 10% or the lower margin in comparison to these two margins. Anti-dumping duty, which is given there, lower of dumping margin or injury margin. So whichever is lower of dumping margin and injury margin will be decided as your anti-dumping duty. Similar is the decision in case of subsidy also. The similar principle we apply there also. Non-injurious price, optimum cost of production plus reasonable return. Now, what is determined as a non-injurious price is for you is the optimum cost of production. And optimization is done to see what is your best cost utilization, what is your best utilization of your inputs, etc. And what would have been your best price for this product. So they will not accept whatever product cost is there as it is. They will do an optimization of your cost elements, like what is your raw material consumption, what is your utility consumption, what was your capacity utilization of over the years. So they will determine your cost of production based on your best utilization of capacity, etc. So once that is the mechanism to decide non-injurious price, and be it the determination of dumping margin, be it determination of injury, be it determination of non-injurious price, these are all done based on inbuilt rules. So when you talk about anti-dumping rules, which I mentioned you in the initial slides, it has specific annexures given with clear provisions to determine each and every concept there. Now, non-injurious price comes under annexure 3 to the rules. So the designated authority cannot determine annexure non-injurious price based on his views. He can't change it case to case. He has to follow annexure 3. Annexure 1 is given there to determine dumping. So he'll have to decide normal value, export price, etc. based on the annexure 1 to the rules. So these are all inbuilt principles. Everything is given there in the rule itself. What is optimum cost of production? I already mentioned it. That is the cost, the best cost which you could have produced the material. Reasonable profit return. We talk about 22% return on capital employed. Now, when they decide a fair price for you for the comparison for the determination of non-injurious price, they consider your cost of production and also give you a reasonable return on that. A reasonable return on at 22% is what the authority is following for so many years now. So maybe for the past 22 years, while determining NIP, India have been adopting 22% on return on capital employed. And what is return on capital employed? Capital employed is net fixed assets plus net working capital. This is the way capital employed is calculated. and on that, a 22% return will be allowed to you. So that is the mechanism to decide your NIP. So if you are a producer who is filing the petition, based on the data given in the petition, an NIP will be, at the end of the day, will be decided. So injury will be decided based on your petition. NIP will be decided based on your petition. It could be one party, multiple producers can participate in one petition. It is not that one producer means one petition. The petition can be combined for 3 or 4 producers of the like article, and NIP will be decided, will be considered as the average for all these producers. It will be decided individually first, and then a weighted average of that will be done. So your petition will be the basis for all this determination. Dumping margin versus injury margin. WTO permits duty up to the dumping margin. India follows lesser duty rule, duty on non-discriminatory basis, retrospective versus prospective. So the first 2 concepts I already explained why, the background in which India adopted lesser duty rule. We don't need, in most of the cases, we may not require duty the level of dumping margin. So India found it relevant to, consider duty only to the level of injury margin, so that imports will still take place into the country. Duty on non-discriminatory basis. This is a fundamental concept, because you can't pick and choose exporter and impose duty. If you have to if you have to impose duty on a particular country, you'll have to do it on all the parties. It can the only exception can be in case of some negative dumping margin or injury margin is there, that party can be excluded. But otherwise, as a matter of choice, you can't do that. You can't say, no, we don't have any problem with this exporter. Let that exporter export to India, but we won't allow other parties to export. That cannot happen. So there cannot be any discrimination in the imposition of these duties. It has to be universally applied, actually. Retrospective versus prospective. In 99.99 cases, I'm not aware of any case where we impose duty on retrospective basis. Normally, the imposition is always on prospective basis. So the duty will start from the date of imposition by the Ministry of Finance. That is the date the duty is counted, and recommendation of the date of recommendation by the DA is not has no impact on the imposition of duty. The imposition will always be counted based on the Ministry of Finance notification, and it is normally the practice is that duties are imposed prospectively. Best information available. This concept we already touched upon in the previous slide. So if you don't give the correct information, right information by participating, you'll have to bear the impact of it. So the best information will be used by the authority, and our finding will be recommended. So that's why we say, if you are a user of the product and if you are aware that there is a case is initiated, file your responses. Make your defense known to the authority. Otherwise, duty can be anything. So if you participate, there is a chance that the duty may not be imposed, or you can get favorable, minimal duties there. So participation as an association, as an individual producer, as a group of producers, a few parties can come together and form a group and file the defenses. So the participation is very relevant here. Until and unless you participate, the DA will not have any alternative information. He'll have to take decisions based on inputs which is given by the other party. We see a lot of parties come to us after imposition of duty. How did the DA do this? They should not have done this. This is all baseless claims. They say it after the final finding. It is completely pointless. So if you have to share some information, you need to do it at the time of during the course of investigation itself. Later, challenging it through appeal or writ petition is all very difficult. The right time, right stage to share your information is before the DA, because a lot of discretion is given to the authority. Even the courts or the appellate tribunal, they interfere with much caution. They don't often interfere with the findings at the threshold. You have to show a case to call their intervention. So the right stage to participate and provide information is before the authority. And if you are aware of an initiation through some sources, in most of the cases, if you are a non-importer, you will get a letter from the authority directly. They will write to you. But even if they haven't written to you, and if you are aware of an initiation, you need to participate. It is not that, the authority has not intimated me about this initiation and I may not be a party to that. So if you are an importer, if you are a probable party who will be impacted by any anti-dumping duty, so then you can participate in that case timely, and you need to participate. Either you can participate directly, or you can participate through a legal representative who can be an advocate, who can be a chartered accountant, or who can be there is no parameter given to determine who has to be your legal representative there. It can be anyone. So either directly or through your legal representative, you can raise your issues before the authority. Investigation procedure. This is relevant in case you are a petitioner. Filing of petition, scrutiny of petition, initiation of investigation, sending inquiry to all interested parties, allow 40 days to respond, receive the information from interested parties, conduct verification to the extent necessary. So in bits and pieces, we discussed these points in previous slides, so I will not spend much time on this. So these are the broader process which is followed after filing of a petition. Continuation of that slide, holding hearing if necessary, preliminary finding, allow interested parties to offer comments, hold hearing, verification, disclosure, and final finding. Disclosure is the only step which I did not discuss earlier. Before issuance of a final finding, a document called disclosure is issued to every party. So a disclosure will be a first cut to the final finding. The DA will tell you, the Designated Authority will tell you, this is the information which I collected during the course of investigation, and these are the basic views I formed on all these issues, and you will get another opportunity yet again to comment on that disclosure. So the final finding will always be issued after collecting this comment on disclosure also, which is issued under Rule 16, and the facts found during the investigation along with the comments on disclosure will be the final finding in each and every investigation. That is the situation in subsidy also. But in safeguard measures, there is no provision to issue disclosure. In anti-dumping and in subsidy matters, disclosure is always issued, and without that, they can't issue a final finding. Recommendation and imposition, as I said, designated authority, the findings of the designated authority is recommendatory in nature, be it safeguard, anti-dumping, or CVD. Designated authority's decision is only recommendatory. It has to be imposed by Ministry of Finance. They are the ultimate authority who can take a call whether to impose or not, and that decision is final there. Time limit. These are all for information purposes only. It may vary 1 month plus minus depending on the stage of the investigation. Date of filing of petition, you can file it at any time, any point in time. Initiation, no limit, 4 to 6 weeks is normally taken. The response to questionnaire, 40 days, 40 plus 10 days. You can, once the case is initiated, you will every party will get the time of 40 days plus as extended time to file the responses. Preliminary findings can take place only after 60 days, but normally done in 4 to 5 months time. Response to PF, you can file a response to PF also in 30 days time. Hearing, in case of PF, it is done after the PF, but there is no timeline given under the rule that you need to conduct the hearing at any particular point in time during the investigation. It has to be done before the issuance of disclosure statement. Or if there is a change in the authority, then another hearing will have to be conducted even after disclosure statement. Hearing, without failure, a hearing has to happen. Disclosure, it is done prior to the final finding, but normally if you look at the time taken between disclosure and final finding, it would be like 50 or 2 or 3 weeks. 1 week time is given for comments on disclosure, and thereafter another 2-3 weeks is the time they normally take to conclude the finding. So once you file the petition and the case is initiated, within 10 months to 1 year, you will have a finding by the authority. Now, these are the normal time. It can come earlier also. We have cases wherein final finding is given at the end of 7th or 8th month also. But we have cases wherein finding is given at the 18th month also. So, but if you are a producer wanting to file a petition, you can consider these things there.
Mr. Nitish, can you just take the concluding remarks now in some time, because due to some paucity of time.
Oh, sure. I will just, I think practices during COVID-19 is what we have, just for information. These days, we have online hearings, no physical hearings or no physical verification. So everything is online now. Some fallacies and misconceptions. So these are not very important that you must know there, but still, imposition of anti-dumping duty affects the user industry, restrict imports in the country, brings monopoly. So these are all some certain concepts which is contested by people opposing anti-dumping duties, but these are all discussed matters here. Quality is not an issue to not to impose duty. Import, even if you impose duty, still there can be imports. It will not lead to any monopoly. So there's no need to believe in all these fallacies and misconceptions. This is all well settled principles there. I think I finished my slides there. Thank you everyone for listening to us, and I think the moderator can give the time for any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Rajesh and Mr. Pothal. We have so many questions, so I'll take one by one. First of all, I want to inform all the participants. We are going to send PPT to their registered email ID. The first question is from Mr. Manish. He's asking whether the MAIS is also a prohibited subsidy.
Can you come back? Which one?
This MEIS, which is now not in India, the RoDTEP is going to come. So this scheme is also one of the prohibited subsidies.
See, when you talk about it scheme-wise, MEIS is being challenged, is being countervailed by US and Europe in many of the investigations. The government of India have been arguing that this should not be countervailed. But as it stands today, these countries are calling it as a countervail subsidy. That is the rule, legal position as of now. The government is still arguing it is not a countervailable subsidy, but the decisions we have so far is that it is countervailable. It is often challenged by the foreign countries actually. So basically, I can't cite a jurisprudence to say that no country can countervail MEIS.
Okay. So second question is from Manish only. So larger companies are able to file their petition for imposing anti-dumping and CVD. Is it a costly affair?
No, I see. I'll not agree to that point. Larger companies, in the sense, if you can fulfill the threshold, you can file the petition on your own. Now, normally there are no charges involved in the filing of petition from the from the government side. When you have to file a petition, you don't have to pay any fees to the government. You can prepare a petition on your own and you can file the application. Normally, the charges, the cost comes into picture when you take the help of a legal practitioner, etc. But otherwise, there are no charges inbuilt in the filing of a petition. It's only that if you are a small producer, you need to show the standing requirements there. The size of your size in terms of your ability to spend for the petition is not a matter which is relevant for imposition of duties. If you think that you meet the threshold, you may be a smaller company for that matter, for that particular product. If you think you meet the threshold, You can you can move the application on your own also. In that case, it involves no cost basically. So cost should not be a factor retracting you from filing a petition. But yeah, even if you're a small producer, if you don't meet the threshold of this 25% or 50%, your petition will not be considered.
Okay. Miss Kajal Anand, she's asking, what if the exporter routes from other country where this anti-dumping is not applicable? Secondly, what would be the impact if we lose against the anti-dumping?
Two things. If an exporter against anti-dumping duties is imposed, start exporting from another country. For example, you impose duty on China, but Chinese exporters start exporting through Taiwan after making some changes there. Then there is a provision given in the rule itself that which is called anti-circumvention provisions. Anti-circumvention provision will be applicable on that export. So whatever duty applicable on China, it will be an investigation altogether done by the authority. And the anti-dumping duties applicable on China will be extended to Taiwan also. You impose duty on China, but but Taiwan emerges as a new source of export. Then you'll have to file a separate petition against Taiwan also, if you haven't covered Taiwan in your original petition. When you file a petition, what happens is every country whose import is more than 3% of total imports into India needs to be included in the petition. So minimum import share has to be 3%. So if you are seeing import from 10 countries and imports from 9 countries is more than 3%, you can include all 9 countries in one petition. It is not that one investigation will take against one country and you need to conduct 9 investigations. It can all be part of one investigation. And after imposition of these all 9 countries, another country emerges. An exporter, it is not a situation of circumvention. Some exporters in that country starts exporting, dumping the product to India. Then you'll have to file a separate petition against that country also. So in both ways, it will be covered.
Okay. Ms. Kajal Anand is again asking, how does government help if any injury is done?
See, the government, there are no help as such given, other than imposing anti-dumping duties. If you face any challenges in terms of filing an application, etc., the government will assist you in completing the petition. When I talk about DGTR has a help desk. You can directly get in touch with them and tell the department that we have a problem. And if it involves a large number of producers, for example, large number of producers in MSME, etc., then you can ask the government to conduct a suo motu initiation also. So wherein you people are too small that you can't fulfill the requirements of all the anti-dumping application. You can make a request to the government for doing a suo motu initiation. I'll tell you that there's a recent initiation concerning import of tiles into India. Now, what happened is there are more than 250 producers of tiles in Morbi, Gujarat. They said we are not in a position to give you all the information. And what happened is that the government has suo motu initiated the sunset review in that matter. So if you think that you are too, there is a group of producers too small, you can't, you are suffering injury, but you are not in a position to file the petition and all because of the data requirements, etc. You don't have the technical knowledge to move this petition. In that case, you need to move a memorandum before the department to say them that this is the difficulty. Kindly consider our case. I'm sure there will be some step taken by the department. The department sits there to help you all. So don't hesitate to approach them. No issues.
So, rightly, any plastic commodities suffering from anti-dumping issue within India?
So there are many products on the anti-dumping duties on many products. But like, for example, there are duties on PTFE, which I believe is an input for, plastic manufacturers. But if you, until and unless you tell me a particular group of product which you say, there are duties on several products. But not any. I don't know what sort of plastic product you are asking about. If you ask me plastic chairs or something, no, I'm not.
Chapter
not
39
aware of it.
specifically. Raw material.
No. See, the PTFE is one. Mr. Pothal, do you want to add any products there? I mean, I am aware of this. PTFE is one product. Then we have duties on polyvinyl chloride, PVC, suspension grade, and other grades of PVC. I think that is
So
also
I
being
would
used.
add plastic processing machine. There is an existing duty on plastic processing machine from China.
And there is a new investigation started. In fact, actually, that duty got expired, and now a new investigation is on plastic processing machine.
So I want to take up one question. This is actually pertaining to the new inquiry regarding plastic machinery. What has happened is the plastic machinery manufacturing capacity of the Indian manufacturers is, say, X. The requirement for the processing industry is almost 2x to 2.5x. How can, if we don't import the machines, we will not be able to produce in time for our export customers. And the delivery timelines that the Indian companies give 8 to 10 months, while a Chinese guy or a German guy may deliver faster. So you would turn around your product faster and you're able to increase your sales, so you increase your exports. How easy is it for the processing industry to challenge something like that the machine manufacturing industry has put forth?
Actually, you raised a very relevant issue there. I mean, this is one issue which often comes in many investigations. We see anti-dumping investigation wherein the domestic capacity is not even 50% of the demand. Even more than 50% of the demand is met by imports, and still anti-dumping duties are imposed in those cases. So the government always take this view that demand supply gap is alibi to say that dumping should happen. So they say, even if there is a demand supply gap, you can't export to India at a injurious price. That is the fundamental stand taken by the government, and which is also approved by the Honorable CESTAT in some matters. So the demand supply gap is not a ground not to impose the anti-dumping duty. So even if in this matter also, if you go and tell the government that don't impose anti-dumping duty because of demand supply gap, I'm doubtful that that argument will be accepted as it is. But I represented some of the Chinese parties in this case in the original investigation, in the earlier investigation. We got the duties substantially reduced in this matter. Earlier, some 200 to 150, 250 duties were imposed. And when in the original investigation, and when we participated a Chinese exporter group in that case, the duty was substantially reduced. Now we are talking about a new investigation. So my suggestion would only be that you need to participate, bring these facts before the knowledge of the authority. There is a possibility that the government may not, impose the duty. And I would tell you there's some development in the practice area also. Now, if you take the cases of imposition of duty for the past 22 years, whatever recommendation has been made by the DGTR was accepted by the Ministry of Finance. But if you take the situation of last 1.5 years or 1 year, we have negative no imposition in at least 20 to 25 cases. So the Ministry of Finance currently is taking a different view on whether to impose the duty or not. So maybe if you present your case well before the designated authority, and if they still impose the duty, you can tell the Ministry of Finance not to impose the duty, and there is a chance you may be even heard there. But what is relevant is that you need to bring all these points before the designated authority now. Otherwise, the Ministry of Finance also will not give much importance to it if you only write to them. So bring these facts before the designated authority, let them take a call, and if their decision is not satisfactory, you will always have the option to go to the Ministry of Finance and tell them, don't impose duty because the demand supply gap is so huge. There's a chance you may be even heard there.
Just to add one more point, Ratish, The earlier investigation which we are talking about in plastic processing machine, it was, I think, up to the clamping force up to 10 metric ton. So what did clamping force? There is something called clamping force in this particular product. So the earlier investigation was up to the clamping force of 10 metric ton.
30 metric tons.
30 metric ton. Now they have increased it to 40 metric ton. In this present investigation, now since they were now started producing more than 30, so now in this particular, they have concluded the earlier investigation. They had the option to file a sunset review, but they did not file the sunset review because the sunset review would have been up to 30 metric ton. So the new application which has come before the authority right now, just started before, I think, 1 month back, and the 40 days investigation time is still there. 40 days time limit to file the response, that is up to 40 metric ton.
About what happens in the case of, say, if your industry B is being heard because of an FTA agreement?
That I believe my colleague already come across during the process. There is something called bilateral investigations, bilateral safeguard investigations. So that can come through the bilateral safeguard investigations.
So we'll have to take the safeguard route. Yes. Okay.
Bilateral safeguard.
Exactly,
There are two
exactly.
types of
So
safeguard.
if you are impacted because of imports under free trade agreements, you will have to go for that route. That will be better.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for your answers.
You're welcome. Any more questions, sir?
Yeah, one more question. So the way DGTR is giving the details of anti-dumping, so is it any way where Indian products are facing the anti-dumping problem?
See, the website of the DGTR has all the investigation about the ongoing cases, but they don't have any database as to which are the probable areas where this issue is there. This can be found out by the particular industry producers by analyzing the import data. You can only see this picture through examining the data of import. If you, as a producer, if you are keeping a watch on imports into India through some sources, then only you will get to know what is the pattern of import, whether it is actually impacting me. And if you think that you're facing challenges from some sort of imports, you can write to DGTR asking for the import data. The primary agency which can share transaction by transaction import data into India is DGCINDS, Directorate General of Commercial Intelligence, DGCINDS Kolkata. You need to get a letter of permission from DGTR. You can tell the DGTR that we are facing imports of this product, but we do not know at what quantity and what price. We wish to collect the data, examine if there is a huge import, then we want to file a petition. So kindly allow us to procure the data. The data will have some nominal charges there. And after payment of that charges, you can collect the transaction by transaction import data from DGCINDS and decide for yourself whether to whether you are getting impacted because of these imports. Otherwise, and it is important that you collect the transaction wise import data. If you go to the Commerce Ministry website, you will get some import information there for chapter wise, subheading at 8-digit level, subheading some import data you would get there. But in most of the cases, what happens is the classification may not be dedicated. So, for example, if you are talking about plastic processing machine as a product, if you go to the published import data of Commerce website.
Actually, I'm asking.
No, I'm giving. So,
Indian
that's what I'm saying.
Anti-dumping issues in other countries.
In other countries. So actually, we made this request to the DGTR also to have a uniform, one website or a place wherein all this information can be collated. But there are no common website as such. We raised this issue. I personally raised this issue to a joint secretary who was conducting a discussion on this. Actually, we had a day-long discussion on these issues, and we proposed to the department that you have a website, common website, wherein information of investigations against India can be, included. But whenever there is an investigation against India, it is normally first informed to the embassies, Indian embassies concerned in that that particular country. That information is routed to the DGTR also. But there are no mechanism wherein you can go to one website and see, these are the cases. In certain cases, it comes to our knowledge because we keep a track of these cases. So if there is some investigation by these prominent countries against India, then we intimate the exporters in that case. But otherwise, the only way is that you will have to keep on checking US Department of Commerce or European Commission website. These are the major countries. You'll have to keep a watch there on their website whether they are initiating any case against India. But as of now, there are no one single place where you can see all these cases against India.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
I guess we want to keep that as the last question. If anyone has any more questions, we can connect them to Mr. Ratish and his company. I guess
Always, sir.
so. I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who have attended today. This seminar. You can already see how passionate Mr. Ratish and his partner are about Mr. Pothal also about this subject. And if anyone has any questions, they can always approach them. They can approach them through us also. I want to inform the participants about there are many more upcoming programs that Flex Council is holding. These can be seen on the website, or you can subscribe to our social media channels or download our mobile app, and you'll receive updates quite regularly. So I hope everyone has enjoyed today's session, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. Special thanks goes out to the COA members, to the office team, and also to the government officials who are attending today's presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Ratish, and
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure talking to you, all of you. Great opportunity. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Shivaji, you want to take it up?
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, Vice Chairman, spending so much of time with us. And I've been hearing the complete presentation throughout. I think that probably we need to have one more session subsequently, because probably some members find it little too long. So probably we can take it up later on. But yes, there are a lot of things which you could learn from this, because usually people think that this is in foreign territory for them. But now probably through this presentation, we thought that probably as a layman or the general exporters can also take the advantage of this, this your anti-remedial measures. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you so